What is risk? Risk. It's this four-letter word. Everybody has heard of it, kind of knows what it means, sort of, maybe not. What is risk? I like to define risk as something going on in your life that doesn't quite live up to your expectations. Things don't go your way. That's risk. Risk that could be as small as I have the risk of stubbing my toe if I'm walking around barefoot. In the market, it could be the risk of having to sell some investments at a loss. Risk could be the risk of dying too early, the risk of living too long. So risk is things not going my way. If we think about it this way, most of the things that happen to us they come at us as a probability. So there's this probability distribution. And in the middle of that, that's what we expect. This is our expected result. So another way to think about risk then is risk is when the result doesn't live up to our expectations. It sits below our expectations. Now, it might be interesting to consider the opposite of risk. What would that be? Some people call it luck. Author Morgan Housel says that luck and risk are siblings. If something happens outside of my control that doesn't live up to expectations, I'd call that risk. If something happens that exceeds expectations, I'd call that luck. So they're kind of two sides of the same thing. But when we think about risk, though, nobody cares about luck. Nobody complains about luck. We all care about risk and complain about risk. And when we think about risk, it's helpful to think about this in terms of two dimensions. So the first dimension is, to use a big word, the probability. How likely is it that the risk is going to show up? So say I'm standing at the edge of a cliff and there's a risk of me falling over this cliff. Well, if I'm far away from that cliff, it's quite unlikely that I'm going to fall. They would say the probability of this risk showing up is very small. What happens though, as I move closer to that cliff's edge, it becomes more likely that I'm going to fall. The more likely it is, the more risky it is. So the first element of risk to consider is how likely is it that that risk is going to show up. Then the second piece of this coin, and the second consideration here, is what happens if it shows up? What's the consequence if the risk shows up? Now here I don't care about how likely it is. So this cliff, it's pretty short. If I fall off of this cliff, that's very tolerable. So if it's tolerable consequences, we'd call that less risky. On the other hand, if this is some kind of 100-foot drop, falling down off of this cliff is very dangerous. So dangerous consequences would be more risky. Now let's lay these two on top of each other. So on one axis, we can put unlikely that the risk is going to show up to probable or even guaranteed that it's going to show up. And then on the vertical axis, we can say it's either going to be dangerous or it's going to be fine, tolerable consequences. Now in that upper right quadrant, it's likely that risk is going to show up and it's dangerous consequences. So this would be another term for this is dumb. You're being dumb. Don't do stupid things. Jumping off a building just to see what it's like. Okay, well, of course that risk is going to show up and it's very dangerous. This is the quadrant that's generally advisable to stay away from. Now in the upper left, this is something that's not likely to happen, but it is dangerous consequences if it does. This could be something like my house burning down. My house probably isn't going to burn down, but if it does, that's dangerous consequences. That's big consequences. What about something that's unlikely to happen, but if it happens, I'm probably going to be okay? Something like getting a flat tire on the side of the road. It's unlikely that I'm going to get a flat tire, but if I do, then I just change the tire or I call for assistance. And then the final quadrant here is things that are probably going to happen, and if they happen, it's going to be fine. So it's something like the power going out or somebody cutting me off in traffic. We know it's going to happen, and it doesn't really impact us. So the ways to think through this in terms of what do you do, well, in that upper right quadrant, stay away from that. Don't do stupid things. Don't do things where you know the risk is going to show up and it's difficult or dangerous consequences. In the upper left, where it's probably not going to happen, but if it does, it sucks. This is where insurance comes into play. This is a tough quadrant because even though it's probably not going to happen, it can, and if it does, it's going to be catastrophic. So this is where we can use insurance to cover our financial risk. Now, important consideration here, insurance doesn't cover emotional risk. It doesn't cover risk that's non-financial. The lower left hand quadrant, you can handle this. You got this. It's probably not going to happen, but if it does, it's fine. You might complain about it, but you knew it was possible, and it doesn't really harm you that much. And then the final quadrant, you should start to expect this. Just change your expectations. Probable things that happen, but you're going to be fine. You're going to see a maniac driver. Somebody's going to disrespect you. These are all things that are going to happen, and that's part of the human condition, and it's going to be fine. So if you can shift your mindset to expect this, you'll be better off. But I want to talk about real risk. If you think about an hourglass it's got two chambers. In the top, you've got some sand. The sand drips through into the bottom chamber. In a classic hourglass, it takes an hour for the whole thing to go through. But what if we, instead of calling this an hourglass, we call this a life glass, where the top chamber has a remaining life, the life that we have left. And at the bottom chamber, we've got the life that we've lived. And the remaining life passes through the present moment to get to the life that we've lived. Right? So the remaining life that we have passes through the present moment to get to the life that we've lived. This is our life glass. Real risk is wasting that remaining life, not using that remaining life well. The stuff in the bottom chamber, we can't change that. That's already fallen. We can learn from that. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from that lower chamber, but it can't be changed. Let's make this even more complicated. We don't know how much life we have left. We've got what I call the uncertainty curtain that covers up how much life we have left. So all we know is our memories and our lessons. We only know the life that we've lived. And we have the present moment, so we know that there is life remaining. We just don't know how much sand is up there. So real risk then, with this top chamber full of question marks, real risk is wasting life. Real risk is getting to the end of our life with a little bit of sand left and saying, I wish I would have done things different. So think about risk in terms of these two different ways to think about it, probability and consequences, and design your life in such a way that you're less likely to think that you've wasted the life that you have. You get one life. Live intentionally. Greetings, Derek again. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more, please head to meaning.blog, and there you can learn about all things related to money and mindset and purpose and meaning, and you'll be able to find out how we might be able to work together. You'll find more articles, you'll find links to videos, you'll find online courses, all kinds of things to get you going on your journey towards living more intentionally.